It's nearly a year since the overthrow of Ukraine's president Viktor Yanukovych plunged the country into an almost civil war, led to Russia annexing Crimea and the eastern regions falling into chaos. With me to discuss the situation is Neil Buckley, the FT's Eastern Europe editor. Neil, what in particular has caused events to erupt in violence recently?
We don't know exactly what sparked it, but there was a lull in the fighting late last year and over the Christmas and New Year period in eastern Ukraine. But in recent weeks, we've seen quite a dramatic increase in the fighting again, particularly along what's known as the contact line between rebel forces and Ukrainian troops, particularly in places like Donetsk airport, where there's been really a battle raging for months despite the supposed ceasefire. Donetsk airport finally fell to control of the rebels a couple of weeks ago. The ceasefire has all but fallen apart, and the West is left again trying to work out how to respond to this situation.
And there's no doubt, is there, that this situation is also very much something stoked from Moscow, that these separatist rebels are linked to decisions taken by the Russian president?
Well, what we certainly know is since the Minsk agreement in September was signed, which was supposed to be a ceasefire and peace plan for the region, Russia has continued to pour men and heavy weapons into eastern Ukraine. So there are more now, considerably more, than there were at the height of the fighting last August. But exactly what the Kremlin is trying to achieve through this is difficult to say. One aim may be to make those eastern Ukraine regions more economically viable by expanding them a little to take in some important economic installations. There are some steel plants, coking plants, which would boost the economy of this region if it were to become a kind of standalone state. Or it may be some attempt to bring the West back to the table for more talks on what Russia really wants about Ukraine.
And does that imply that Russia really still has the upper hand or the ace to play in this situation? I mean, obviously the fighting so far has been pretty bad for Ukraine's armed forces. The separatist leaders only the other day were announcing plans to conscript tens, if not 100,000. I think the number was of locals into their fighting forces. I mean, it does very much seem that this conflict could deteriorate further.
I think there's a serious danger of escalation, but what we're seeing now is the debate over whether the West should send defensive weapons to Ukraine. Now, one argument is that would deter the rebel forces from any further advances because it would greatly increase the costs that they would suffer. And we do know that Mr. Putin is very sensitive to news coming out of Russian soldiers coming home in body bags. But the danger, of course, is that by sending those kind of weapons to Ukraine, that could simply prompt Russia to escalate further. And it may be that the announcement by the rebels of attempts to mobilize a 100,000 strong army is in fact a response to this talk of arming Ukraine and a warning of escalation if the West goes down that path.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a shift in thinking on the fringes of policy making in Washington and a little bit in Europe as well, given the way that the sanctions don't appear to have really acted quite as directly as one would hope on deterring Russian aggression in eastern Ukraine. So I think there's definitely momentum behind the idea of sending more arms, but that's still a bit of a taboo subject, I think, both in Washington and certainly in Berlin as well. I think the French and the Germans, but particularly the Germans, who have been really the key players in negotiating with Putin, seem to be very reluctant to go further down that route. Neil, thank you very much.
Thank you.